Welcome to Levels of Connection, where we discuss how human connections work and why they're so important. Welcome to Levels of Connection. In today's episode, I'm speaking with Jonah Larkin. Jonah is an entrepreneur, a founder. He's a business coach. He is a facilitator at the Stanford Graduate School of Business. I love the way that he shared his whole journey and related it around connecting. He shares a framework around connecting that he uses. He speaks about his experience and he speaks about forgiving yourself up front, which I found really interesting. He talks about rejection in connecting. Really interesting chat. Enjoy. We're on. Jonah Larkin, welcome to Levels of Connection.
Hi, Stephanos. So happy to be here, man.
It's really good to see you. So, Jonah Larkin, to introduce you to our viewers, you are a leadership coach, and as well, you are a facilitator at the Stanford Graduate School of Business.
Yeah.
Tell us more about what you do, Jonah.
Well, I do a lot of different stuff, but as far as my career goes, yeah, I work primarily with CEOs and their leadership teams. So what that means is that I usually start coaching with the CEO and help them with the myriad of things that we help CEOs and leaders with. And then very quickly, well, not always quickly, but almost always start to work with their leadership team and helping them communicate better. I like to think that well, not even like to think, I am convinced that there's about 30 to 40% of what I call the performance premium on any time you get a group of people together, that you can liberate just by creating really high level quality communication. And most of us aren't aware of really that gap between how we are communicating and how we could be communicating. So that's what I do with leadership teams. At Stanford, I have a super fun role. I get to teach MBA students in a process called T group, and it's essentially 12 people sitting around a circle giving each other feedback. And there's no agenda, so it's totally wild, really interesting, really fun. I've learned a ton from doing that.
Sounds very interesting. Very interesting. Talking about communication and connecting and communicating, what does even levels of connection mean to you, Jonah?
Well, it's a great question, but I would say that, the way I think about it is as sort of a dynamic spectrum of how we actually interact with other people, ourselves, and really the world. Because ultimately, what are we connecting to? What are we connecting to? And ultimately, I believe that there's no separation between anything and anyone. So that connection is always there. So I like to think of it as making it more conscious, right? If I'm sitting there really looking at a tree, for instance, if I'm me and the tree's over there, there's no connection. But if I'm fully present, 100% present, without any other thoughts, then there's no separation between me and the tree. And so that can happen with the tree, with the ocean, with you and me, with large groups of people. All of us have been to concerts before, and we're like feeling the music, maybe the DJ or the band, and everybody, you just feel like this amazing group energy, this connection. It's like, whoa, what is this? So yeah, I think of it as a spectrum, really.
And what are the ends of the spectrum? What are the different points on that spectrum?
Well, on one point of the spectrum is feeling like I'm completely alone in the universe and that nothing there is that I am completely isolated. I am the separate self, lonely, isolated. It's kind of the worst feeling in the world. I think that's the scariest, worst feeling that I've ever had is that feeling of isolation. And then on the other hand, universal consciousness. I am not separate at all. In fact, there's even no I to be separate from anything else. So I would say those are the two, like, that's a very wide spectrum.
Mm.
Within that, when we're talking about human connection, it's a matter of uh, basically going from these sort of ritualized ways that we connect with somebody, like maybe the barista or someone at the grocery store. Oh, hi, how are you? Oh, fine, how are you? Richard Francisco, one of my mentors at Stanford, has this great framework called the five different levels of connection, and I don't remember what they all are, but it's like the first one is ritual, and then it goes to extended ritual, which is like, oh, now we're talking about the weather. And then we start sharing, then we start talking about a subject, right? We're still not talking about ourselves. But then level 4 is when we start talking about how we actually feel about the thing, right? Level 5 connection is where you and I start talking about how we feel about our relationship.
Nice.
So
Really
I think that's a
interesting.
wonderful framework for how to connect,
And how would you, for somebody new to this concept, how would you advise them to go about, exploring the different levels that you described?
I would say, like, start to think about what your best think about the best conversations you've ever had with anybody. Like, what's the best conversation you've had with anyone? Can you remember, like, one of the best?
Yeah, a lot of great conversations the last few years in the coaching world. Really, that there was, like, I remember it was like effortless. I was speaking about something and sharing, and then they would either reciprocate, but not in that tic tac mode, in the very natural, effortless. Not that I said something, that you need to say something, and not even just complimenting me. We may have just exchanged different feelings or information, but it just felt effortless.
So there was like just a free flow exchange of energy.
Yeah.
Flow state. Yeah, I mean, I would sort of prompt someone to think about, like, have you ever had a conversation like that? Because those are enlivening, joyful, energizing. There's just something so spectacular about those, right?
What about people that are just hesitant of, because speaking with others? Because a couple of reasons why I started this channel was, first, the difficulty that I had when I was a child to communicate and to interact with other people. And I was sort of fumbling along to see how this sort of communication thing, connection thing works. And
Yeah.
the other reason was, as an adult going to different conferences, I realized that it was sort of one-way communication. People would just receive information, presentation, bum, 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 bombarded with information. There was no interaction. There was no communication on the floor side of things. And that's why I started this public sort of keynote experiences where we have people interact with one another. How about the people in those conferences that have difficulty interacting and meeting others, when there's no sort of facilitation of the process?
Yeah, that's a really good question. I mean, look, I went through my own process of learning how to communicate well. I was an only child, and so, and even though I had always had friends, there's something about when you grow up with siblings where you have that constant back and forth of communication constantly happening, that I think builds a lot of like skills and resilience in that world. I was an only child. I was kind of isolated. So I actually had to learn a lot about how to communicate. And I still, even though I feel like I'm a really good communicator and I can walk in and I have charisma and
Mm.
all of these things, I can still walk into a public space and like get scared, right?
Mm.
Get a little bit, feel a little bit panicked or something. And so I would say, like, if you're at a conference or you walk into a room or anything, basically it's like the first thing is like the mindset is that people actually do want to talk, because there's a release of stress that happens when I just come up to you and I say, "Oh, man, that's a cool shirt you're wearing." And you're
Mm.
like, "Oh, thanks." And so I the way that I do it is, at this point, I just walk up to somebody and say the first thing that usually comes to my mind. But you can also be strategic about it and actually find something, like look around the room, find something that you find interesting about someone, or maybe you're curious about something, or maybe you saw someone before. Oh, hey, didn't I see you at the that other panel? Right?
Mm.
It's like anything that sort of comes up in your mind, you can pretty much say to somebody, um, and that can start a conversation. And it's
Yeah.
kind of amazing, right? Just walking up to somebody and saying like anything, "Hi," uh, can start a conversation. Sometimes it won't. Sometimes, people will blow you off or whatever. Um, and that's another thing, developing the resilience to just deal with rejection, because that
Yeah.
of course is going to happen as well.
How did you deal with rejection, especially in the beginning? How did you feel about it?
Well, at first I didn't even realize it was holding me back. It was like I didn't realize I was afraid of rejection. Once I
Mm.
realized I was afraid of rejection, that actually helped, because what is rejection? It's actually not, it's just somebody saying, it's not anybody saying anything. They're just not comfortable enough interacting with me. It has nothing to do with me. It has everything to do with them. And 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 so once I realized that, I'm like, "Oh, it's not about me." I can just go, and I know where I'm coming from. I'm coming from an open-hearted place of interest,
Mm.
curiosity, maybe attraction, all
Mm.
of these things. I mean, I've been rejected by so many people, socially, romantically, all of these things we all have. Like, if you
Mm.
try, you will be rejected. And so the thing I realized, oh, it's not about me at all. It doesn't mean it doesn't hurt. It still hurts a little. It's like my heart still goes, "Oh my God, I just got rejected." And then I'm like, "Oh, it's okay. It's okay." I give myself credit for trying. Always,
Mm.
always give myself credit for trying. And you know what? The truth is, I always feel better when I try than when I don't try. It's when I don't
Yeah.
try that I actually feel worse. I could have talked to that person.
And you never know what kind of, opportunity or person you would have met if you never tried.
Oh my God. Yeah. Yeah. You never know who, you just never know who you're talking to, which is great.
Mm.
It's one of the thrills of life is, meeting people and finding out that you share this amazing commonality or what have you. It's so wonderful.
And between your different jobs, careers, positions, what what role did connecting with others play?
Well, I mean, connecting, it's about trust. I think that when you really connect with others, when I connect with people and I find something about the other person that interests me and they find something out about me that interests them, that creates a bond.
Mm.
And I believe those bonds are sacred. And as a result, I can call someone up who I may not have spoken to in 10 years, and we may not actually have had that deep of a relationship, but just the fact that we shared a connection means that that is still open. And so in terms of all my careers, from being a startup founder and you know, working in restaurants when I was a kid, and uh, being an entrepreneur, and then being an acupuncturist, and then being a leadership coach, all of these things, it's like connection is the key to all of that. And I always say,
Mm.
in business is more about who you know than anything else. Like, yeah, you can be a great strategist, a great tactician, an incredible mind, but really it's about who you know, because we don't do anything alone, right? We do
Oh yeah.
everything together. Even when we look at someone, we go, "Oh my God, look, that person pulled themselves up by their own bootstraps." They actually didn't. They did it with a whole bunch of other people.
When did you realize this?
Well, I think it's like been more of a process of realization than like an insight of, "Oh my God." Uh, I think the myth that there's a cultural myth of, at least in the US, and I know you're not in the US, but I think American culture has sort of infiltrated worldwide culture. There's a
Mm.
myth of the rugged individual who, you know, goes out to the frontier and like makes a life for themselves. And it's just have you ever watched that show Alone?
No,
They
no.
send they send people to the wilderness and they try to survive as long as they can.
Oh wow.
And like it's basically a starvation contest. If you can starve the longest.
Oh
And
wow.
and it just shows that we just, we're so dependent on each other. And so yeah, I think I'm still realizing how interdependent we are. And
Mm.
that's what's lovely, is like the more that I realize I'm interdependent, the more that I can ask for help, and the bigger impact that I can have. Uh, I mean, that's my experience.
What has been what would you tell your 20-year-old self, now that you have this knowledge and this experience?
That's a good question. I would tell my 20-year-old self that uh, the most important thing is to understand that other people have not just a perspective, but a reason that they have that perspective, and forget about what their perspective is. Find the reason underneath their perspective. When I was 20, I was more into like telling people what my perspective was and why their perspective wasn't the right perspective.
Mm, mm.
Which is, in one of the things I work with is influence. It's a horrible way to influence people. It does not work. It's absolutely the wrong
Yeah.
way. None of us like being told like, "Oh, you're wrong." Like, "Oh, screw you, buddy." But all of us like having someone be really interested in not just what we think, but why we think what we think.
Mm.
And when you start diving into why you think what you think, that sort of metacognitive skill, then we can start to get somewhere. And that's where I think magic can happen, whether we agree with someone or disagree with them. Oftentimes I find that disagreements are oftentimes about misunderstandings and semantics. And when we really get down to it, many times we agree, and occasionally we don't. Occasionally we have a values misalignment. There might be one,
Mm.
you and I. Yours might be adventure, and mine might be security, right? Um, but nonetheless, at least we know at that point.
I'm hearing that you really learned the value of connecting with other people, and on a very uh, deep level, from the different experiences that you've had in the different roles that you've had in life. So you learned the hard way, if you will. Um, and I can feel, what you're, the pain of the experiences, for lack of a better word.
Yeah. Oh yeah. Oh yeah. Yeah. I've definitely walked into the buzzsaw a bunch of times.
Mm,
Um, and sometimes I continue to walk into the buzzsaw. Um, you know, being at Stanford and teaching and facilitating there, it's like I am somebody who's kind of a contrarian in many ways. Much of the time, that's the role that I tend to comfortably operate in. So in group dynamics, most of us step into group. So we have like how I step into relationship with you, then I have
mm,
how I step into relationship with groups. And many people have one strategy that they rely on more than anything else. And the skills you want to develop are being able to have a multitude of strategies for communication. And
okay.
so, sort of one of my like go to easy strategies that I feel very comfortable with is being a contrarian. Um, and there's benefits to being a contrarian because you step into a group, there's like groupthink going on. You say, actually, I completely disagree with that. Have you thought of this? And maybe the majority of the group hasn't thought about that, but there's always a couple other people who are thinking the same thing. And so they come up to you and they're like, man, I'm so glad you said that. I'm so glad you called that out. So there's an advantage to being a contrarian. The problem with being a contrarian in my case, and also like stepping into it from a state of privilege. And
Hmm.
I know that's kind of the whole DEI conversation. This is beyond that. I'm just saying, like, I've I've stepped into many conversations thinking that my voice is really, really important. And
Mm.
and what I found is that actually stepping back and listening to others is a lot more powerful than putting my voice out there, because once I listen to others, then my voice, what I have to say, actually holds more power. So yeah, I mean, there's situations where I've like uh, basically told students I don't believe them, right? Yeah, I don't believe you, and that comes from like a deep intuition that they're not actually touching the truth of what they're trying to say, right?
Mm.
And instead of like drawing that out of them, I'm just like, "Oh, I don't believe you." Well, that's super alienating and
So
creates a
it
lot.
shuts them off instead of going deeper. Mm.
Exactly.
Mm.
So
How did you realize that?
they gave me feedback.
Okay.
Yeah,
Okay.
they gave me feedback like, you know, Jonah, I really appreciate the way how direct you are, right? It's like other students that are like, Jonah, I love how direct you are. It's really
Mm.
wonderful. All these other people are sort of beating around the bush and you're super direct. But man, before you step in, it'd be really helpful if you gave some context. Like,
Mm.
hey,
Mm.
the reason why I'm saying this, I'm role playing here. The reason
Yeah.
I'm saying this is because I want to actually connect with you and be closer with you. Um, and so when I hear you speak like that, I get super activated over here, and I tell myself a story that this must be a lie.
Mm.
So I wanted to check in with you and just see, like, is that really what's happening, or is there something else? Right? Totally different way of stepping into that
Oh,
potential
yeah.
conflict.
How did that feel when you did it the first couple of times? The change of approach that you had.
It felt formulaic and
Mm.
and strange, but honestly, I adopted it pretty quickly because I started
Mm.
to see, like, if you've have you ever checked out nonviolent communication?
No. No.
It's one of these. It's a communications framework. The point is that the main point is that you really talk about yourself instead of the other person.
Mm.
People have this habit. I noticed there's this really bad communications habit that many people have, and it kind of goes like this. uh Stephanos, I feel like you um are a really honest and open guy, right?
And I feel some bad news coming my way, the way that you're framing that.
Well, no, actually, I just gave you a good judgment. That's actually a
Yeah.
good judgment. That's my assessment of you. That's not a
Yeah.
feeling, right? My feeling about you is like, Stephanos, when I'm around you, like, I feel good. I feel warm. I
Mm.
feel like encouraged. I feel like I want to, I, and the impact is that I want to hang out with you more, right? That can also go on a negative side. If we were like being negative, I could say something like, Stephanos, I feel like you just don't listen to me. Well, that's not a feeling, that's a judgment,
Mm.
right? And so
Mm.
most of the time in conflict, what we're doing is we're throwing our projections and judgments on other people. And then we're using this word, I feel like, which
Mm.
is if you say I feel like you, those I feel like you, those are the 4 words to never say to anybody, because that's not a feeling. I
Yeah.
feel happy, scared, angry, loving, excited. I feel excited when I talk to you, right? Or I feel angry when I talk to you.
Mm.
I feel like you aren't listening to me. I feel like you, right, whatever. That's a thing. And so it took like a lot for me to be like, oh, okay, I see what's happening here. And my job, especially in conflict, but even not in conflict, is to talk about my experience when I'm with you. And that's extremely powerful and compelling
Mm.
for both parties.
Yeah.
Does that make
Yeah.
sense?
Oh yeah. Oh
Yeah.
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 And how much, you know, of a stronger connection do you create by communicating in that way?
Well, I know that when somebody communicates with me that way, I feel like really seen, received.
Mm.
I was telling a friend last night. We were like a friend I hadn't seen in a long time, and uh, I was like telling her about this relationship breakup I had been through like many years ago, and
Mm.
how one of the things that happened was I just stopped telling people about it, because every time I would tell somebody about it, they'd like tell me some story about how I was supposed to be dealing with it, or their projection of me. And what I really wanted was just to be like, "Oh, hey Jonah, how are you feeling?" Right? I
Mm.
just wanted to
Mm.
be like fully received. And it's very, very powerful when someone is just present for us to be received in that particular way. So, one of the things that people feel awkward about is when somebody is like, oh, diagnosed with cancer, or they've had a close loved one die. The first thing that people try to do is they try to make it better for the person, which is really the
Yeah.
worst thing you can do, because it comes off
Mm.
as totally tone deaf. And so I know that when I'm in a difficult situation, even if it's of my own making, the first thing I want is I just want to be fully received in that way, and it feels great. And so when I'm able to do that for others, I always feel wonderful. Um, there was a young woman I was speaking to, and she was like, "Yeah, my like the person who I thought was my life partner passed away 2 months ago." And I didn't say, "Oh, that must be difficult." I just said, "Wow, what
Mm.
was his name? You know,
Mm.
tell me about him." Right?
Yeah.
Just like, how are you doing with that? What are you doing? Just kind of like that. And, it's awkward. I don't really know what to say in that situation, but just like slowing down, stopping, and
Mm.
just, we oftentimes we think we have to be, you know, talking out of our mouths, when we can just like be, and that's also communication, you know?
And I think we're so used to trying to fix things, and when you get these, you know, tragic or bad news, we feel so awkward, and we get into sort of hyper positive trying to fix things, where it's sort of a boomerang completely, instead of just being there for the other person.
Yeah, I totally agree with you on that. Totally agree. And I, you know, I'm a man. So are you. We want to fix shit. You know, it's like,
Mm.
oh, that's broken. Let me fix it. Right? It's like
That's the immediate reaction.
totally.
Knee jerk reaction.
uh,
So talking about fixing and creating things, what would you suggest um, to people that want to create a habit of connecting on the level that you've talked about and described? What's a method, what's a way about
yeah.
achieving that?
Yeah. So first things first is you gotta forgive yourself up front in the beginning. You know, you will step in it. You will step in your own stuff 100%. Because if you aren't stepping in your own stuff, you're actually not learning. So
Hmm.
that's the first thing. Forgive yourself up front. Okay, I know I'm gonna like step in it and all of that. And so the second thing to realize is that, okay, what I'm gonna optimize for is not for not screwing up, or what I'm gonna optimize for is for repair, right? So making amends.
Okay.
And so you need to get good at uh, figuring out how to make amends when you do screw up. And so the framework is to forgive yourself, focus on like being able to repair, and then go out and start trying stuff. Okay, and think about the 5 levels of communication ritual. Hey Stephanos, how are you? Fine, how are you? Secondly, hey, let's talk about kiteboarding, right? Second level. Third level, hey, let's talk about how we feel about kiteboarding, right?
Hmm.
uh Fourth level, let's talk about how we're actually feeling here in this moment. Fifth level, let's talk about the context of our relationship and how we feel about each other. And so you want to slowly go up that ladder.
Hmm.
And so you can just start. You can start by walking in. Maybe you have someone you get your coffee from. And maybe you're at level 1 communication. Oh, hi, how are you? Fine, how are you? Right? I always like someone says, how are you? And I stop and I think to myself, how am I? And I'm like, you know, I've actually had a pretty good day because I went swimming in the ocean this morning.
Hmm.
Right? And someone's like, they like take,
Do they freak out? Do they freak out?
no, they're just like, oh, cool, and then you
Oh,
start
nice.
talking with somebody and
Okay.
it immediately opens someone
Yeah.
up. So it's like if somebody says, how are you? Like step out of the ritual and actually
Hmm.
how am I? And notice when you walk into a situation, um, ask open-ended questions. So, uh, hey, what's it like being a barista? Or what did you do today? Or,
Hmm.
uh, you know, uh, what what's it like working here? Anything like that. It's like asking people like yes, no, good, bad questions is uh if you want to be a great conversationalist, you got to learn how to ask open-ended questions.
Nice.
Yeah,
Very nice.
that's how
I
it's.
love the way that you've dealt with the whole, spectrum and gave examples, and I love the way that you sort of transported us through the beginning of your journey and how you felt then and how you feel now, and the way that you're describing that you still have a way to go and yet you're still curious and you're still discovering. uh, I just find it liberating when I'm speaking with people that are thirsty for more and are curious for more and love to explore.
Yeah, it's so true. I mean, I was like, I I feel like there's a certain lane which I feel like I am an absolutely world-class communicator. Not in every lane, but in certain lanes I feel like super world class. And but then I'm always learning too. I was talking to a friend who was just in Paris, and she was walking with a friend, and apparently Paris was all blocked off because of security
Hmm.
issues.
Yeah.
She was in this neighborhood and they couldn't get across this bridge, and her friend went up to the cop and said something, and the cop like let them through, and she said, well, what did you say to him? He said, well, I went up to him and I asked him, what could we walk through? And he said, no, you can't walk through, this area is blocked off. And she said, yeah, but then what did you say? And he said, I said, I understand that the rule is that we can't go through, um, but you actually have the power to make a different choice and let us through if you like.
Wow. That was it. That was
That's it. The guy let them through. It's,
I love
it's
that.
like, oh, I learned something, and it triggered this. I learned this negotiation technique years ago.
Hmm.
This is a crazy negotiation technique. Um, and this is like just a straight technique, but it's a trip. Like,
Hmm.
let's say, like, I've used it for all sorts of things, like getting refunds on plane tickets, where they want to charge me extra money because I missed my
Hmm.
flight, where I want to return something at a store that they have a no return policy, where I want to bring my backpack into a movie and they're like, sorry, sir, you can't bring your backpack in here. Like, I've used it in all sorts of situations. And it basically goes like this. The person says, I'm sorry, sir, there's no backpacks allowed in this movie theater. And I'm like, I understand there's no backpacks allowed in this movie theater, but I'd really like if you were able to make an exception for me. And I'm sorry, there's no exceptions. That's our policy. So what you do is you just you repeat back to them exactly what they said and agree with them, and then repeat your request. So
Okay.
you just say, oh, I understand it's the policy, that there's no backpacks, but I'd
Hmm.
like to bring it in. I'd really like to bring it in. And you have to be very stubborn about this. And then they'll say, I'm sorry, I don't have the authority. And then you say, I understand you don't have the authority. There must be somebody here who has the authority to make the decision. And what will happen is, if you go down that rabbit hole long enough and you keep repeating back to them what they
Mm.
say and repeating your request, they'll almost like 90% of the time they'll honor your request. The only time it hasn't happened was with Spirit Airlines at Oakland Airport. They wanted to charge me for my bag and I didn't know that there was a charge, and the lady legitimately just walked away. That was the only time it hasn't worked. She's like,
If
walked.
she stayed there, you would have convinced her, but she walked away. So,
Yeah, it's I don't know, it's some weird psychological trick or something, but it's an incredibly powerful negotiation technique. I'm serious, try it. It's crazy. You can get
I will, and maybe this is a really good tip for our viewers to try what you suggested and see what and give us their comments, what how their experience was.
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. But you have to be the best thing is to be super nice. Like, don't be a jerk. Like, be
Mm,
nice
mm,
and repeat back what it is they said, and then repeat your request. And it's just, you have to really center yourself. Speaking about connection with oneself,
mm, mm,
helps if you're centered in yourself and you're not attached to the outcome. You're not trying to convince anybody, you're not trying to push. Just like stay centered, listen to what they're saying, repeat it, and then repeat your request. And yeah, see what happens. It's crazy. You'll be blown away.
Let's try that. Talking about connecting with yourself, tell us a little bit more about how you connect with yourself. What are your rituals?
Basically, my biggest ritual for connecting with myself is like being in nature, 100%. Like that hands down is the best way because, um, if I go to the beach and sit on the beach or go hike up a mountain trail or whatever, um, there's it's all the right kind of distraction, right? I've evolved for that type of distraction. Humans have evolved. And so for me, that gets me into a state of calm and clarity. There's a reason why forest bathing is a thing, right? It makes you feel good,
Mm,
alive, centered. And so that's the best way for me to like connect with myself is to be in nature. And yes, I have a meditation practice. And yes, there's all these other ways to connect with myself,
mm-hmm,
but that's the best way for me.
mm,
And I think really for most humans, because it's the environment that gives us the most. Um,
yeah.
you know,
Thank you, Jonah. Thank you.
pleasure.
Thanks for coming on. I really appreciate it. But we have two things before we close.
Okay.
What did you get out of this conversation today? What was useful for you today?
It's always useful for me to try to explain my own the frameworks,
Mm, mm,
that I use because it reminds myself that I have these skills, and it's just like any other language, use it or lose it.
mm.
And I forget to use these skills all the time. So that's one.
And
Yeah, go ahead.
and the I lied. The second to last is this one. What's something if I was a viewer and I watched this today, this conversation today, what's something that you would encourage me to do, within the next hour that I viewed this episode around connecting?
I would go and I would write down 5 people, if you have that many, but at least 3 people that you want to have a deeper connection with.
Okay.
Write that down. Just do that. I want to have a deeper connection with these people. And then think about the conversational framework, um, and try to use that. Because if I step into relationship and just say, hey, Stephanos, I'd like to have a deeper connection with you. That's powerful,
Mm,
you know,
yeah.
just even that simple thing. So
Oh
yeah,
yeah.
I would do that. And just, I think the realization that yes, communication has all these nuances and all of that, but ultimately we sort of like wrap ourselves around the chain so much when, you know, it can be really simple too.
Oh yeah. Oh yeah. Thank you, Jonah. And the last thing is that, you're a surfer, you're getting into foiling as well. So next time we have this conversation, it should be on a beach in Cyprus. So the
I completely agree, my friend. I'm like, yeah, I want to come and learn to kite in Cyprus, man, for sure.
you're always welcome. Next
Okay.
time the second episode of our conversation is going to be in Cyprus.
Okay.
And I'll see you
It's a
soon.
deal. It's a deal.
See you soon, Jonah.
All right. Thank you, Stephanos.
Bye. Thank you for watching today's episode, and thank you for your continuous support and subscribing to the channel. Go ahead and give us your comments if you've tried any of the techniques that Jonah suggests. I'm really curious to see how you reacted and how the people around you reacted. See you soon.